Hello, everyone. Welcome into Dr. Darnice's Writing and Lifestyle Salon. And I want to welcome you back and thank you. I got a couple more subscribers. I appreciate that. I wanted to come back on and talk about a couple more books for the season in which we live, right? We are living in a time where it's become extremely evident that a lot of Americans, particularly white Americans, really just don't have a grasp of what's been going on for Black America since the very beginning of America. And now there are all of these reading lists, like the one I made, right? How to be an anti-racist. And those are basically, essay type of books or academic oriented. And I wanted to come on today and give some literature because, as it is, the way literature is taught in American high schools and colleges is that for the most part we get something called American literature, which usually does not include Black people. It might include one, but for the most part, I teach at a university, so for the most part, when students come to my classroom and I ask them, have you read this one, have you read that one, they say no. So what we know for sure is that the literature of non-white people gets relegated to, well, in this case, African American literature, or maybe Latina literature, Asian American, and so on. So America tends to still remain or appear white. What's American is white, and then everything else is everything else. Other people deal with race or deal with their own, so that white children, really all children, let's just say, all American children grow up not knowing about this entire other body of literature. And when you're a kid in school, K through 12, if no one's taught you, you really have no idea. You have no way of even knowing, right? And you don't really ask the questions because you're a kid and you're just going to school. So you don't sit there and go, well, who aren't we reading, right? When you're a little kid. So this video is about, who are some of at least the giants in American literature, but particularly African American literature. So for those of you who are doing the work of, educating yourselves in terms of, how to be an anti-racist and that very heady academic kind of work. And I know for people who are not used to reading, multiple books, a year even. I mean, we've gotten to the point in America where Americans are not even reading a whole book in a year, or maybe they'll read 2 books in a whole year, which from my perspective is abysmal, but that's because I'm an educator, right? And we're all kind of caught up in our devices, and so we do other things. We look at Netflix and we are on our phones a lot. But it does mean that when we're not reading, we're missing important information that's in those books, right? And people have talked about the dumbing down of America, the intentional dumbing down of America by people in leadership. And so, like I tell my students, you have to think to yourself, who does it benefit if the general population doesn't know anything of substance? Who does it benefit when most Americans are obsessed with celebrity news and gossip? Right? Like, who's benefiting? Because the average American is not benefiting from that. People in other countries, they tend to have a better sense of a better educational or more comprehensive education, so that they're aware of literature. They tend to speak multiple languages as it is, right? Most Americans only speak English, and go to other countries and then complain that other people don't speak English when they get there. But in America, right? So we're really off balance, and what we've got to come to the realization and acknowledge in this moment is Americans have become pretty ignorant. I'm just going to say it flat out. Not only have Americans become ignorant, but relish it, right? Because they'll say, oh, the liberal elite, because that means we read or we analyze things, we critique. So it's highly problematic. Like in America, it's almost like, oh no, you don't want to be somebody who reads too much. But this video is about, here's some more books to read. So I hope you'll stick with me. I'm going to start with one of our greatest writers. Uh, she's most known for her work during the Harlem Renaissance, Zora Neale Hurston, and she's most known for her book, Their Eyes Are Watching God. Um, she's a phenomenal writer, phenomenal. Zora Neale Hurston. So when I teach about the Harlem Renaissance in my class, this is, mostly freshmen coming to university, and I know I never heard of her. I'm like, oh, one of the greatest books ever written, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Now it's been made into a movie, which I don't recommend. It's really not that great of a movie, but the book is amazing. It's awesome, and everyone should read it. Basically, it's a coming-of-age story of a young woman. It's amazing. But because Zora Neale Hurston is black, whew. So this is one of her. I don't happen to have Zora Neale, Their Eyes Are Watching God here. It's in my academic office. This is another one of her books that came out recently because it was recently found that she had. This is called Barracoon: The Story of the Last Black Cargo. She was also an anthropologist and did a lot of research, interviewing people. And one of the last, she was able to interview someone who had come over on a slave ship, one of the last ships. And she was able to talk to this man in his old age. So this would have been, 1927. And she was able to talk to him about his life. So that's what this particular book is. And so I highly recommend it, obviously, Barracoon's or Neale Hurston. But, if you've got to pick, it's a picture of her, you've got to pick, go with Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's outstanding. It's an outstanding piece of American literature, but you will find it among African American literature. Also, Toni Morrison is another one. This is Beloved. Toni Morrison you have most likely heard of. Right? Beloved is her, I was going to say it's her masterpiece, but Toni Morrison is such an incredible writer that almost all of her books are masterpieces. But this was extraordinary, and I'm surprised. Like, this is a paperback, but you can find the hardcover. It's a really huge book, and you may say, I've heard of that. Yeah, Oprah starred in the movie version, so you may have seen it, or if not, you could watch it. And then again, I'm going to recommend that you read the book also, because the book is always better. But Toni Morrison is one of our most beloved American writers. She recently passed away, like in the last 2 or 3 years, I want to say. And you may have really seen her. She did an interview with Charlie Rose back when Charlie Rose was on the air on PBS on his show. And there's a famous clip of that interview that's largely shared, because he asked her about this continued criticism of her work, which is to say that white critics would always say to her, well, when are you gonna, it seems like you only write about black people. When are you gonna write about other people? And I hope you hear what's wrong with that question. Charlie Rose is saying, well, these critics seem to have a ongoing criticism of you, or is it a valid observation or critique? He asks Toni Morrison in this interview. And so the interview clip that's going around, especially now, considering the context in which we live, about the gap between what white people think of as normal and what black people think of as normal. And Toni Morrison said, why would you ask me that question? Do you ask white writers why they don't write about black people? Now, Toni Morrison was very diplomatic in the conversation with Charlie Rose, and she said it in a very, very nice way, kind of. But there was a little back and forth because Charlie Rose wasn't getting it. And here's what frustrates black Americans: we can tell you something, and you won't get it. So she had to continue to explain, why are you asking me? I'm a writer, and I write about what I know. You're asking me to write about people I don't know as well, white people. Okay, But do you ask the best of white writers who only write about white people, do you ever ask them, why don't you write about black people? When are you going to write about some Hispanic people? Why don't you have any Asian characters? And finally he goes, right? Finally, because he's like, oh, I see what I've been doing. I've been thinking of regular people are white, normal people are white. So Toni Morrison, when are you going to write about regular people? If you talk about black people, it's always race related. She's like, no, I tell stories. And my people happen to be black. Anyway, Beloved is one of these stories that's magical realism. So it kind of deals with the dream state and who's and a ghost and all of that kind of thing. So it could be a challenging read, I will say, but her writing is beautiful, and she's one of our national treasures indeed. This is a book that I use all the time. You really may not, I'd be surprised if you heard of Stacey Ann Chen. She is a Jamaican and Chinese woman who is best known as a spoken word poet and artist. And this is her memoir called The Other Side of Paradise. And I like to use it in class because it is her memoir of growing up in Jamaica as this biracial Jamaican Chinese young girl, and it's her coming of age story, but it's about her intersectionality in her being. You know, she's always trying to figure out who she is and trying to find her father who, like, there's this back and forth between her and the person she thinks is her father. So it's like my father, she calls him my father who's not my father. Anyway, it's a very heartwarming story. It's a challenging story because Stacey Ann really does go through a lot of challenges and abuse, even as a young girl, as a child. But anyway, it's a great memoir and, fairly, easy reading if you just like, well, I want to read something that's kind of easy. It's summertime. I just want to read something that's not too much. Okay, The Other Side of Paradise would be great for that. And then another person I have to mention is Ta-Nehisi Coates. I haven't even read this yet. I have to admit, I have so many books, y'all. But it's not so much this particular book that I am on here recommending, although, yes, I own it. I think anybody could read it, The Water Dancer. But Ta-Nehisi Coates is best known for a book he wrote called Between the World and Me, which got him on a lot of television shows and he interviewed quite a bit. Sorry, I'm bumping the camera. Because it was an essay about race relations, growing up as a black man in America and as a boy, right? So being a young, very Baldwin-esque. So when I talked about James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time, very much that kind of a story from Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so, again, I'm just really recommending Ta-Nehisi Coates. Again, this is how you spell his name, in case you can't quite hear it. Ta-Nehisi Coates. And again, that other book is called Between the World and Me. And since I've mentioned Baldwin, I always love Baldwin. And so I'm going to say anything from Baldwin. His fiction, I guess I would say his real most famous fiction was Go Tell It on the Mountain, and then Giamatti's Room, Another Country. Really anything by Baldwin you pick up, you're already winning. But if you want something fiction, something that's literary, then Go Tell It on the Mountain. And Alice Walker, I must also mention. You probably know her from writing The Color Purple. Color Purple became a movie and a play, right? But it was written by the great writer and poet Alice Walker. And all right, I feel like I'm bombarding you with a whole lot, and I'll pause there. Write in the comments, who you know. What about this person? What about this person? I'd love to hear. There are so many other genres, like science fiction. Afrofuturism is a whole nother genre, where black writers are writing science fiction and speculative fiction. The classic paradigmatic writer in that field is Octavia Butler, if you happen to like that kind of thing. But my point here is to say, broaden your horizons in terms of what you read, and understand that the African American experience is really an American experience. It's a particularity of the American experience, and there's no reason that it should be shelved separately. There's no reason where when we go to school, K through 12, we don't even know. And then you get to the university, and again, you don't know unless you take a class in African American history, African American literature. Again, it's separate. And so, some white people never know, because anything that has black attached to it or African American attached to it, you won't ever look at it. You just simply won't look at it. And then time, everybody's time is, valuable and short. We all feel, somewhat strained about time, and we've got to make our decisions how we'll spend our time. And so when something seems really foreign to us, we probably won't go that way, right? So I want to make it more mainstream and normative to say, here are these other great works and these other great writers. And yes, they are black. It's not like they have to pretend that they're not, or people should say, well, I don't see color. No, I want you to see color and appreciate it. Not see color and think it's less than. See color and appreciate. So again, that's my short list, believe it or not. I know it got to be a bit long. This video is getting a bit long, but what can I say? If I had to pick my favorites, I'm going to always say Baldwin. I'm going to always say Zora Neale Hurston, Harlem Renaissance literature. I mean, really, if you just type in the Google machine, Harlem Renaissance literature, you're going to find everything in the world there. Another thing from Harlem Renaissance is Nella Larson. I really love Nella Larson's work. So again, I could just off the top of my head name people, but I don't want to bombard you. So that's it. Bye for now. And don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate it. Share this video. Share it widely because people need to know. All right. So bye for now.